attendance associated with interest in CSO activism. So this is present but passive observer. Basically here the physical presence of citizen at budget meetings or other sessions does not necessarily mean that he or she is actively participating. And signing a petition remains an important aspect, but as I mentioned there, it is a complicated process. Citizens complain, the citizens opt for complaints, ignoring other forms of local participation like attendance in budget meeting or petition. Informal contact, this is also came up in the interview. Citizens can express their needs to elected officials in very informal ways, like in a cafe or and attendance at budget meeting. So the next mega code, which is the dynamics of local electoral behavior, we call it DLEB, dynamic, because we do this in through the use of special system. So we have the lack of electoral competition due to family networks. So basically here, local elections lack competition in contexts where the commune is predominantly inhabited by the same family and tribe of the candidate. Citizens' vote depends on the behavior of the candidates in the election campaign. So here this is also was very interesting. So citizens are likely to vote for a candidate based on his or her action during the campaign and not on his or her contribution to the community during his or her term. So basically here if they give money and corruption, this is how they end up. So it has nothing to do with how they actually perform. We came up also with this interesting, which is punctual patronage system, what we call it punctual patronage system. Here, during local electoral campaigns, the elections or the re-election of a candidate depends on the existing patronage structures in the concerned commune. So, there are clearly, I cannot go over all of this, but this is only a very, very small sample. I want to move, because I don't want to take too much time, into the next, which is the reasons for no citizen participation. The reasons for no citizen participation, which is another mega code. Is that clear there? Yes?
Yes.
Yes, okay, so the reason for no citizen participation. Here, there are a number of units of analysis that we come up with. Some people basically told us that they are too busy with their own daily life. They don't even think about. So preoccupation with personal issues. So elected official claims that citizens don't participate at local level because with regard their own daily problems, especially in rural areas here. Complexity of the petition procedure, which I mentioned earlier. Reaction of public institutions to hierarchy of the reef as a factor of mistrust. So clearly, because we were doing our field work in the reef area, where the hierarchy, which is the major social movement, we had to put that into consideration. Basically, here citizens in some of the small town, the semi-urban and rural areas, citizens have lost trust in public institutions because of the latter's ineffective response to the hierarchy of the social movements of the reef. Lack of social mobilization by political parties. Here, political parties rarely do much to mobilize and sensitize citizens to political participation. This has to do with the gradual, clearly irrelevance of political parties in Morocco. Fear. Elected officials believe that citizens tend not to participate in local governance due to fear. Sometimes it's referred to here from a cultural perspective, hashma or waqar. Lack of awareness and marginalization. Concerns about migration among youth. This is especially in the north, where the majority of the youth are clearly migrating or either overseas, and there is basically nobody who can pick up the torch in terms of. So this is also was interesting. Lack of training and know-how among CSOs. Sometimes the civil society actors lack the know-how and what we can call au Maroc la technicité, and that's also can, because some of the CSOs are really established mainly to gain money and not really for real concern for the local citizens. The dwindling role of elected officials. Well, here we found number of, by the way, under all of these categories, units, there are number of quotes that we have. I didn't want to put the quotes in Arabic here, but that will come in the report, of course, translated. Dwindling role of elected official. Here, elected officials affirms that the minimization of his role may be a factor that limit participation, so that citizens know that the elected official do not really have power. So that's mistrust in institutions. This is something that came up a lot, mistrust in institutions. Now, what are the potential of political participation? Here we found also some interesting mega code. So let me go just quickly over some of them.
You have some 5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay, sure. No, I will finish within 5 minutes. So, resolving personal problems of the citizens by the EO. So actual, so that people can become interested in them that are overseas. So they feel that the dynamic social classes are again not part of this. Believing in the democratic procedures. Different actors must believe in the democratic ideals and participative principles in order to engage more in the public sphere. Independence of elected officials. Here, basically, elected officials suggest that citizens may participate when the elected officials can manage local affairs independently, and clearly that's not yet really the case. Establishment of large-scale surveys that was suggested, trust and proximity and developing closer contact with citizens, peer education, guidance and mobilization of the citizens, communicate well with citizens, youth candidates as potential factor for restoring citizens' trust and participation, technology, social media and electronic platforms, it was suggested, proximity and developing closer contact with citizens, and finally raising political awareness and education in this. So let me conclude within the last 3 minutes that I have. Morocco has, I think, an equation to solve, and it is an equation that has to do as much with the nature of the state as with the weight of the past and the kind of societal project that it wants to move its citizens into. I evoked earlier the ambiguities and contradictions that are inherent in the state discourse about citizenship. These ambiguities are the result of historically grounded political culture and about the disparity that exists between the constitutional text and the realities of citizens in everyday life. Contexts that are marked by histories of authoritarianism and the subjugation of individuals are not amenable to the principle of citizenship. Such principles require real ruptures with an archaic political culture that is reminiscent of the past. To deal with the question of citizenship in Morocco, it is important to raise basic conceptual questions about the concept of citizen and the extent it can be adapted to the Moroccan political context. Theoretically, citizenship combines a formal status as a member of a community, legal status, and a set of political, social, and cultural rights, and the possibility of free political participation within a given community in the form of election and or within civil society organization. From this very basic conception, I think that while the formal sense of citizenship as part of the nation state has been well established in Morocco, this is not the case with respect to the rights and active participation of the citizen. Moroccans are essentially confronted with two conflicting concepts that vacillate between the individual as subject, ra'iyya, and citizen as muwatin. it is important to know, I think that the inherent contradiction of Ra'i versus Muwatin, Ra'iyya versus Muwatin, of the notion of citizenship in Morocco is in reality a reflection of the inherent contradictions of the Moroccan political system as part important aspect of encouraging citizen participation. Political parties need to come up vis-à-vis the palace and mobilize the people in order to mobilize the people. Addressing these challenges requires not only strong political will on the part of the palace, but also the courage, competence, financial resources, and skills that are needed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that very rich presentation and your references to the data that is extremely rich, and that will take some bit of time to interpret, but also giving us the context of the Moroccan situation. The fact that you have a transitional process, you in a semi-authoritarian system. It's also a country that's under a monarch, which makes it different from the other three countries. Thanks for bringing out those points. I think the floor is open for comments and questions the next 20 minutes or so. Any questions and comments, immediate reactions to the presentation? Yes,
She asked for the,
Ah.
but I will ask the question.
Ah.
You can go ahead. Thank you. Hello. Samaili. Thank you for that really excellent and interesting presentation. I wanted to ask you to elaborate a little bit more about these two conflicting concepts of citizenship, Ra'iyya versus Walden. And I was wondering whether you've consulted Mahmoud Mabdani's work, Citizen and Subject, because I think it might be very, very relevant to your own kind of examination and deconstruction of the way that citizenship works in Maghreb. So that's, yeah, my question.
Thank you, Professor Idris. So I want to speak about the INDH, initiative INDH. You spoke about the domestication of CSOs. So my question is, what are the manifestations, the domestication of CSOs in Morocco, and does it implicate sort of clientelist behavior in the communal election from the CSOs domesticated and from their base of working? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation and a very elaborate coverage. As I said yesterday, great work in a lot of work in qualitative research comes in the analysis, and this is a clear attest to what Chris has to go through synthesizing issues from 1,000 pages plus into maybe a more concise paper, and really we're happy with that work that you're doing. Two issues that I picked from today's presentation that I would like to get your clarity on. In one of the discussions, you said that according to the survey data, the CSO seem to be pursuing more of their interest than the interest of the citizen. So my question is, whose perspective is this? Is it the CSO themselves, or is it perspective from citizens? So I think the voice matters here.
Of course.
Many times we are likely to point the fingers to the other person saying, they are not doing, but what are we doing ourselves? Another interesting issue that you brought is on the political process, and that in Morocco, as the current democratic space, most of the elected leaders will be elected on the basis of what they do in the campaign period, as opposed to their track record. So
not most, but at least some. It came up in the interviews.
Yeah.
So, and the fact that it was among a number of us, that became part of the unit of analysis.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question was whether in the two regions where you collected the data, that is Rabat and Tajir, do you see leaders, maybe either at the local level or parliamentarian, be elected on the basis of this, beyond what people were saying in the interviews, so that we have evidence to support that argument from the data? Thank you very much.
Okay. One more question.
Thanks, Prof, for the comprehensive presentation. My question regards to the issue of the citizens. You know, sometimes when people speak about citizens, it's as if citizens are a monolithic group, but we all know they're not. They're women, they're men, they're young people, they're those with disabilities, and so on. So I wanted to understand whether in your research you managed to disaggregate the participation according to different social groups, women, particularly women and young people. What is the situation with regards to this? Thanks.
I think you may want to respond
Sure,
to
yes.
those. Yeah, sure.
Yes. So thank you for your questions. First of all, I would like to deal with this notion of Muatin versus Ra'iyya. Yes, I am familiar with Mamdani's work, and you know, in the Moroccan political context, one of the interesting, but also it became gradually simplistic, is the cultural interpretations of the Moroccan political system since Clifford Geertz, and so Morocco was an ideal context for thinking about political authority via the lenses of cultural anthropology, and I think it's good, but it has become part of a cultural determinism. But here I evoked it because I think it frames I think the mind of officials of the official state. Let me give you an example. In Ramadan, there is a religious teaching that is conducted every day on Ramadan during the whole month of Ramadan. They are known as the Hassaniya courses, and it is done in front of the monarch with the white-robed man, as Camp Shielding calls him, one of the cultural anthropologists that speaks about cultural performance, and in her book Sacred Performance. Now, in one of the courses, because the lessons, because you have different lessons from people from Saudi Arabia, from Beirut, so different religious scholars come to this. But the first lesson is given by the Minister of the Awqaf, the Minister of Religious Affairs. And I remember one of the themes that the minister is in relation not to Ra'iyya, but to the notion of ta'a, as an important aspect on the part of citizens. So what does ta'a mean? Sort of obedience to the ruler. Obedience to the ruler. And this is part of the religious lexicon that is instrumentalized by the state to legitimate, not only the position of the ruler, but also to a certain extent the limits about, for example, the 2011 February 20th movement. I wrote an article on that. It was perceived as fitna, which fitna means yes, or that has a sort of religious connotation. So here, the instrumentalization of the religious field is important, I think, not only in terms of legitimating state activities and state support, but also in terms of how they think about the citizen. And so this is one thing. The ENDH, base of work. Yes, I think that one of the interesting things that that the ENDH has managed to do, again, as a system of cooptation, is how to domesticate gradually civil society actors. And this is, by the way, again, part of the long-term history. If you look at the work of John Waterbury, the commander of the faithful, who wrote about what he called segmentary politics in Morocco. This is as early as 1970s, 73. That was his argument about how Hassan II dealt with different political parties. So cooptation is a part of the system, except that at different moments of the history of Morocco, there are new, since parties have been sort of have lost legitimacy. By the 1980s, we have seen increased emergence of initially independent civil society actors, but then gradually the state became involved in the creation of civil society actors, and gradually further under Mohammed VI, the ENDH became a way to integrate them. So it's no longer the parties, because now the parties under the tutelage, and they are more monarchist than the monarch himself, and they do not constitute really independent force. So this is important. Now, in relation to the third, whether it is their own perspective, actually this was this idea about the CSOs was evoked not in the interviews, but during the focus groups that we conducted in both Tangier and in Rabat. And the focus groups included only CSOs.
Okay.
So they themselves evoked this, and of course they were extremely concerned, because they feel, and we have it in another mega code, because we have other mega codes that are specific to I have not used them here I have not used the mega codes of the focus groups, but they have it is the civil society actors that speak about that.
Okay.
Yeah. So political process. Political process, yes. Whether I have proved, yes. Well, corruption. Again, to go back to John Waterbury, who wrote The Commander of the Faithful. Also in the late 1970s, he wrote an article, not this time, not a book, about endemic, what he called endemic corruption. And let me tell you a little sort of story that an anecdote. So that speaks to this.
Okay.
I was one day walking on campus, and then one of my colleagues, who is with the Istiqlal Party, who in fact helped me get. I remember what I was speaking about, having difficulties, people talking to me and conducting interviews. So he actually was really helpful, because he knew the secretary, general secretary, and he gave me his phone, and then I called him to facilitate to have people who would like to do interview. So this guy he told me, Si Maghrawi, how come you don't, because he knows that I don't vote. So I told him, well, I honestly, you know, I simply, I have to, I have voted in 2011 against the Constitution, and I did a critical analysis of the Constitution afterward with 2 other colleagues. But honestly, the parties have lost the legitimacy. So he told me, no, you have to integrate so that you can reform from within. And anyway, that was like a Monday. And then on Tuesday, there was this, because it was during the election, you know, that I mentioned. That's one of the reasons why we couldn't do the fieldwork. There was a video that was circulating on YouTube about literally this person from his own party, the Istiqlal, who was filmed giving 2 chickens to the people who voted. Yes? So I picked up that video and sent it to him.
Before voting or after voting?
No, before.
So it's bravery.
Yes, so I forwarded that video to him, and I wrote, now see, do you know why I don't vote? So I think there are facts. You know, there are different ways of thinking about facts. Thank you for your point. I'm glad that you raised that. In fact, this was part of the initial presentation. I literally took a whole section for the beginning to have time to present on that exact point. Now I feel that I should have left it, but we are taking into consideration notions, of course, the urban rural divide or semi-urban, but we are also taking into consideration the level of, we have a whole mega code, because we conducted mainly with elected officials. We have a whole mega code on what we call the trajectory of the elected officials. So it speaks to their class, to whether they have been before active in civil society organizations, before they became elected officials. So that's, in fact, that was the first section of the questionnaires that we had. So there is consideration for that. Okay.
Thank you.
Can I ask just a question?
It's right here too.
Sorry?
Okay.
Sorry?
Okay, you can, and
Oh,
then
there's someone else.
and then there is proof.
No, let him begin first.
No.
You have the mic.
You have
The
this
mic.
mic.
It's just thinking around about the potential of this paper in 2 different directions. One, what weapons do the weak have in monarchical situations? In terms of, to frame the question in terms of power centers in Morocco, the monarchy playing a very important role, the political parties on the side, the government on its, in quotes, it's also there. All these are centers of power, right?
Yes.
I'll
react
I
to
don't know
that,
whether they're centers of power, but they are very important actors in Morocco's politics, in institutions.
Okay.
Now, very domineering. It's got an authoritarian monarchical tendencies. So under such circumstances, the question that we should be asking is what's the options that are left for the ordinary people to exert their voice? And that's what I think what the paper is trying to do. So the question to ask is what are the main options left if you are disillusioned with the political party? The monarchy is shouting and ringing heavily on your head because so many, and the political, and the government itself is, what can I call it? It's also domineering, you know. So what is left what is left for the citizens, especially if citizens at the local level? The organizing characteristics of citizens at the local level is what we are trying to do. But maybe we need to look at it in the context of these three points and see what options are there for them. Is it sustainable? is the struggle for democracy in Morocco, for instance, sustainable given these particular contradictory tendencies that we seem to be seeing here. And it's not Morocco alone, even in other places like in Swaziland, where the monarchy is as strong as we have here. Citizens have always been voicing exit option, exit from the monarchy in quotes, but they are always faced with heavy repression by both the monarchy and sometimes by the government, you know. So those are the tendencies I wanted to see whether they can be elaborated a little bit.
There's a mic here already.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you, Idris. Just one or two questions.
Yes.
When you talk about domestication of CSO in Morocco,
Yes.
does that apply to all intermediary body? Because intermediate, I talk, for example, about union, etc. Second question, it's about the health, state of health of Mohammed Sis. We have heard a lot about the weakening of royalty recently in foreign press. I don't know if it's the same thing in Morocco or not, but does this weakening have an impact on the power of manipulation of the makhzen on civil society and political parties?
Okay. Can we
Yes.
yes,
So,
the last word?
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for your question. In the initial phase of my presentation, I spoke about what I call the first layers of the onion, which is about the political system and how it functions. But in relation to your question, I think one way of thinking about how the Moroccan political system functions, it's like a set of concentric circles, whereby the inner circle of power is really the monarchical institution and the informal sort of position. So, for example, the position of advisors of the king is actually informal. It's not constitutional. It's not in the constitution. Yet, of course, these are key elements in political power. And the more you move into the outside circle, you have the ministries of what we call the ministries of Ministry of the Religious Affairs, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Ministry of the Interior. So these are key ministries where normally the people who get there are clearly chosen. There is the green light from the back. And then you have the outside circle. The outside circle is the government. So I always like to distinguish between the state and the government and the parliament. So you see there's an interesting dichotomy here. So those are the ones that are there to confront the people. So in a way, this outer circle is meant to protect the inner circle of power. So, for example, when you have social movement like the February 20th movement, they did not walk in front of the palace to shout. They walked in front of the parliament.
The parliament, yes.
Yes.
Okay.
And one of the PGD, Party of Justice Development, Islamist party, he was in government and he got tired of this because he clearly understood what is behind that. And he used the Moroccan expression because he said, you have to stop eating garlic with our own mouth. I don't know if you got the idea, to eat garlic. Do you have the same saying in Tunisia? Otherwise, that when you say to somebody, you eat garlic with my own mouth, as that I get the worst part of it and you get the part. And this is a strategy that has been historically established, and this is in addition to the solutions, and so there is so we are finishing an article just on analyzing the discourse of the speeches of the monarch, whereby there is a clear strategy to associate the problems of the society with the parties, with the and the other with whatever is great, and so this work, what I call dispersed solidarities and movements that have existed. The reef was one of the last. The other way of how people manage this is what explains the youth are simply leaving and dying, and the bark, what we call the bark of death, where people are trying to migrate. I think the same thing is happening in Tunisia. And of course, you have to use Asif Bayat's notion of the silent majority. That's another story. You never know what can happen. But things clearly are not sustainable in the long term. So, in relation to your question, Professor Abduhab, the same thing gradually start to happen with labor unions. In a way, the cooptation system in Morocco has been able to do not only with political parties but also with labor unions in a number of different ways. So that I remember in the 1960s and 1970s, you can clearly see a demarcation on the part of political parties vis-à-vis the palace. But gradually, this has really changed in a number of ways. There is a kind of emasculation of the forces, social forces and political forces that could play an important role in terms of working with the monarchy, but toward really a better political future and more. And they have lost its missed opportunities. I wrote an article on the irrelevance of political parties in Morocco in the Journal of North African Studies to show exactly what is happening as far as political parties and their lack of independence. And this is really major obstacle toward the real transformation of the Moroccan political system. It used to be that really with the USFP, Union Socialiste de Force Populaire, and really some key in the 60s, and even the Istiqlal and the Al-Fasi, there was always this kind of demarcation and mutual respect, but independence. Abdullah Ibrahim, the first government in Morocco, the government of Abdullah Ibrahim was, but that gradually changed in a really major way. Your second question? Oh, the health.
It's about the state health of Mohammed.
Well, this is clearly a concern on the part of many Moroccans. I, like you, read just about it in the newspapers. But we have seen, changes, and we are wondering who is really is in control. But clearly there is a gradual disengagement, I think. And from the very beginning, the new king is not really Hassan II. New king is more oriented toward business. And honestly, we have seen some important changes at the level of infrastructure. So he's not the typical political man. He is, and for example, we have never seen him engage in interviews with journalists in the way Hassan II used to do so. He would love to do that. So, but there is the issue of health and his presence or lack of presence inside Morocco, because he's. I think the health issue has made him more outside of Morocco than within Morocco, and it is raising concern.
Thank you so much, Chris. Let's give him. We go on to the second presentation by Dr. Kamal. She is presenting from Kenya. You have the floor. You can either come to the front, be comfortable.
Yeah, I think thank you. I think from where we stopped yesterday, in terms of what work we've done in Kenya on devolution, and like I mentioned yesterday,
Sorry.
yesterday, we are working on 4 papers. So this is one of the papers from the Kenyan team on health and devolution. And of course, we had the overview yesterday from Kanyinga on the conceptual aspects. Yeah, so when I thought about what are the issues that I want to focus on health and devolution, we reflected on a number of questions. Of course, the overall question is, does devolution enhance service delivery at the local level? And what is the role of the elites in terms of supporting service delivery in health?
Try that. Oh, this one. Try it.
Yes, so the question is, how does devolution help access to services?
Still not.
Yeah, how does devolution enhance access to health services at the local level? And what would be the role of the elites? This one wants. Yeah, this one is better. Yeah, so one of the questions, of course, we wanted to focus on when it comes to health, what was devolved? And I will not go too much into this. And how was the decision on devolution of health, and what aspects, the various aspects of health that were developed done? Who were the decision makers in this? What we also consider to be the elites? Who are this in the healthcare system? And what is their role in devolution? And then we also asked the question, has devolution, I think that's the overall question in terms of access to service delivery, but also the question of the citizens' participation in decision making to ensure that services get closer to them in the context of devolution. Then also, because of the debates that have been going around in Kenya in terms of how devolution, whether or not devolution has enhanced healthcare service provision, we also asked the question of decentralization. Should health services be decentralized? So that's a critical question that we asked. So we have used a number of sources of data for this paper. Mainly, initial phase is the secondary data sources, looking at the history of decentralization, issues of decentralization, citizens' voice, and health service delivery, incentives for government elites in healthcare provision in Kenya, incentives for government, and decentralization itself, and in the context of local elites. We've also used the Afrobarometer data, round 8 and round 9, which part of it is still, we are doing still continued analysis. And then the Kenya Demographic Health Survey, part of the data that we've used, Kenya Devolution Program data, and then Millennium Challenge Corporation data. Again, looking at indicators, for example, bed expenditure, immunization, child and maternal health. Although for this now, I will not present too much because of time. Yeah, so our data is, like I mentioned, is in 6 counties, which we selected either based on region, or county capacity to absorb devolution funds. And this was very important for us. Because then we asked a question, when you go to the county and you look at some of the indicators, that the county has high capacity to absorb county funds. But when it comes to real service delivery, in health, what do we see? And of course in other sectors. And of course, we also did qualitative data where we had key informants and focus group discussions. So now, the question of decentralization in health is not new. And it was actually decentralization of health, we would say, began even before the Kenyan Constitution of 2010-2013 kicked off the devolution process. Throughout in the health, medical health history, we've had Wold or this push for devolution or decentralization, either coming from international organizations who we call the international elites, like the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the UNICEF, for example, 1987, we had the Bamako Initiative, where they pushed for decentralization of services to come to the level of the district, user fees to be charged, but those user fees to be managed at the local level. So health facilities or dispensaries, according to the initiative then, as proposed, would then be able to determine what are the healthcare needs and also manage their own resources at the local level. But however, we know that that didn't quite happen. Decentralization still took place. Facilities were decentralized in terms of service provision, setting up the healthcare structures, that really were up to the local level, but then these were not necessarily followed with financing. And that was the real challenge of the Bamako Initiative in terms of really pushing for devolution and making services reach the county level. Then around 2001, then we had the Abuja Declaration. Again, here was more, what we could pick from that is that more was commitment of governments in terms of health financing, where governments committed to spend 15% of their annual GDP on health, but we also know that most countries did not. Few countries are actually giving more than 5% of their annual allocation, annual financing budgets to health, except maybe countries like Togo, I think there was Rwanda, a few countries, just 4 countries in Africa that actually gave 15% of their, or honored their declaration. So again, we find Kenya is among the countries that do not honor. And the question is then, do these international policies actually follow action even when it comes to the county level? When it comes to fiscal planning, when you think about fiscal, why commit what you cannot deliver? So we've seen this, then of course, the African Union has also been pushing for, for a further allocation of resources, but again, we've not seen real commitment from governments. So of course now comes 2013 in Kenya. Let's go back. Where then we see, so what happens in a context where there was already some level of decentralization, where I would say there was a policy-driven sort of reforms by the international organizations, but also now we have the political process where you have the political decentralization, which is anchored in the constitution. And that becomes a newer form of decentralization or devolution in Kenya. So what we have are sort of parallel structures still within the healthcare system, because we have some aspects of healthcare that were really decentralized to the county level, because now we embrace the county level governments with 47 counties, but some elements of health were still retained at the national level. So we have the political national structures, where some parts of it remain at the national level, and then we have the county level structures. And of course, with many, many actors and players, whether the international organization, whether they are political, the political class. So again, we have all these players in there. I think already I've said this, but what we would say is that, like already I said, the process didn't just begin in 2013, but what is critical in the health sector is what we call the Big Bang, where Kenya's devolution, the health sector is stated to be one of the most devolved in the country when compared to other sectors. and perhaps maybe Kaninga, who's been working a lot in this area, can comment on this later. But again, it just happened. It's when we look through the literature and even through the interviews that we gathered, what is said that the health sector was not developed in the same way that other sectors were developed. You look like the education sector, there was careful determination of what was to be developed. But the health sector, it is like, so much went to the county level, and very little, even though what remained at the national level is still also very important in terms of really influencing healthcare provision at the lower levels. So in the devolved system, the counties will also have responsibilities in terms of planning and budgeting. Of course, there's a county planning process, financial management, in terms of human resources. Of course, human resources at the county level, and this is one of the contentious issues when it comes to decentralization. Provision of emergency services. So when you go to some countries that have high accident patients management, one of the things that they complain about handling are the issues of emergency care, and also related to that also are medical supplies. But overall, of course, it's like the liberation of Kenya. If you look at what was proposed in Bamako Initiative 1987 and what really we have, it was almost modeled around this. But whether really we are still getting the benefits of this is the question. So in a way, when you look at the structure of the healthcare system in Kenya, it is 6-tier, level 1 to level 6. And with specialist care at the apex, at the higher level, level 6, referral, teaching, and all that at the level 6. But then you have community healthcare services or community-based healthcare services as you move down. And with the primary healthcare facilities being at the level 2, and you move up with more specialist services as you go up. But now when you look at the quality in terms of really the roles and resources distribution, then it doesn't quite follow the structure that we have. One then think that, when more services are at the lower level, of course, the question is more specialist services at the higher level, so you might need more resources, but then what are the country resources to even enable, because level 5, level 4, level 2, and 1, 5 to 1 are county facilities, level 6 is what only remained at the national level. So those ones get funding, financed directly from the national level, but the other ones, the money is devolved to the counties and it's supposed to be county funding. So, and this is where the question, the real challenge begins when it comes to healthcare financing. Of course, I don't want to handle this because it's behind, I think, later. But again, this is where we see, even when it comes to health service provision, the level 1 to 5 is where we really see citizens' role, citizens' participation, and this is where we ask the question of the elites, even at the national level, in ensuring that the county level service delivery also is effective. So I think I will skip this. Of course, just go back a bit. Just go back a bit. Yeah, when you think at in terms of level 1 to 6, and you look at the structure, of course it's a policy, the national policies, but you also have the county health policies. And whether these two really, when you look at service provision at the lower level, whether it's an issue of human resources for health, whether it's issue of drugs and essential commodities, whether it's the issue of even just preventive care, supporting the lower level health services, is also, I would say, there's also a lot of confounding because counties will have varied outcomes depending on who also is supporting healthcare in that county. Some counties seem to have, for whatever reason, they attract health development actors. So you find some programs, like you might find USAID in some programs, in some counties, but some counties don't have any sort of donor funding. And we know that the health sector is one of the sectors that has a lot of funding from international agencies. So the question that we still would ask is why then are some counties not able to attract funding? Has it got to do with anything with governance? Because the understanding is that health challenges across the country may differ, but are there. So again, in terms of even being able to attract the international funding, again, varies from county to county. And again, it's a question that I cannot answer right now. I think just click that. I think I've talked about that. You can just click that as well. Yeah, so now we look at what was really the promise of devolution. When we devolved and services went to the county level, what is it that we expected to see? Of course, other than just bringing services closer to the people, it would be expected that county leadership would also be involved or would seek to provide health services, improve the infrastructure at the county level, either expand or rehabilitate the existing facilities, or equip them, with whatever equipments they would have, but also in some way begin to offer specialized services that, previously patients would go maybe to level 6, national level to 6. So we begin to see this now happening at the county level. Again, in addition to that, of course, the issue of health workers at the county level. When we were devolved, counties also began now to employ health workers. And again, the number of workers that they employ, the kind of workers that they employ may vary from county to county. But of course, a lot, like perhaps what we may be told, has to do with the wage bill, where some counties may not have, for whatever reason, either sufficient resources or not in terms of hiring county health staff. But of course, if this really worked well, it would mean that we would reduce the need for referrals to the national facilities. And that would also mean that as we move from the lower structure up the structure to the higher structures, we decongest healthcare services at that level. That would mean then, at whatever level, there would be efficiency in delivery of services, and only very critical cases get up to the national level. But of course, the reality, what we see, is a bit different. And overall, of course, we would have reduced health workers' burden and also improved community health services. Then, of course, overall, that has implication even for healthcare financing. Just move on. But then, of course, then also we would expect that citizens would be involved in decision-making on matters of their own health if really devolution was to work the way it's supposed to work. So the question, of course, that we ask then, how do we, do we really see this happening? Are we seeing citizens being involved in decision-making in terms of their own health? Are they getting free healthcare? Because level 1 to 4 is supposed to be, free healthcare services. Again, are they getting really free services? And what does it even mean to get free services? So again, this is a question that we're asking. So overall, what I see, if devolution was really to work, is what I call the benefit circle. That if really it worked well, citizens would be the greatest beneficiaries. They would have access to quality services. They'd be involved in decision-making on matters of health and have their primary health care needs met. And then, of course, this at the systems level, there will be lessening. There will be lessening to seek. They will also have lessening to seek costly and delayed care, and this would also, of course, have overall impact on healthcare financing, because then you don't have to spend a lot of money on health when you can really deal with them at the lower level. And then, of course, this again will translate at the national level in terms of overall disease burden of the country. But then, what then would that mean? We're looking at issues of efficiency, quality, accountability, and local governance in terms of management of healthcare systems. But then, so we looked at some of the data then that we have, and I refer to the Afrobarometer data of 2023, in terms of then when it comes to citizens, then what do they perceive are their most really important challenges? And you can see that health emerges as number 3. After all this, number 3, health is really a critical health issue in the country, and is one of the main concerns that the citizens raise and continue to raise. Again, compared to whether they have access to services, I find it interesting that at least 78% of the citizens say they have access to services. But when we interrogate the qualitative data, then you ask the question, so what are these services? Because the impression we get is that either, depending on the county governance systems and structures, the services will be there, the physical infrastructure is there, but real service provision, and this is a question that we need to separate, what really is service delivery? Is it just the infrastructure, or is the quality of care? So again, this is a question that we ask. Then I found this more like of a contradiction, but when we asked them, in the past year, have you ever gone without services? Very few will say they have always gone without services. But at least most of them, of course below 50%, have never gone without services. So the assumption then is that at least services are available, people are able to access services. But if we combine the just ones, the several times, the many times, or always, then we might find a different scenario, what we might get in terms of real access to health services. So again, but of importance also is to look at the cash income. When you're talking about a system, when you're talking about a system where patients have to buy health medicine and the cash income is low, then it means there's a problem. So again, we need to really think about.
One is working. The higher. We still have a.
Yeah, so it's on now. So again, the data on health expenditures, I found this to be a little, of concern. It's really not. Fixed. We find variation. Some 2017, for whatever reason, health expenditure was high. Of course, we look at data before 2017. It may be different, but then we find it coming down, and sometimes there's really oscillation. But when you look at immunization rates, now this now goes to the really county health facilities. Then we find, again, it's a bit of improvement over the years, but we don't know, of course, the reason for this. It could be either because counties now are investing more in the community healthcare systems, or national vaccine programs are running on national programs. So again, this could be it. But again, the child care outcomes, one would expect to get better outcomes, but of course it's what we have. But health expenditure is important because it means that there might be an overlap with how healthcare financing is provided also by the national government. So this is one of the counties which, even from the qualitative data, we find positive outcomes. And when you look where citizens are saying, actually the county has helped us, they have created more health facilities, this is in Sierra. And of course, when there is county investment in those services, this is the kind of results that we see. So again, it means that if counties really invest in healthcare, of course there are challenges. We also had some dissenting voices, even from this county. But again, we are likely to have better health outcomes when we invest in healthcare. Yeah, so then we ask the question of how do citizens actually perceive healthcare in the countries that we covered. What we are getting is that decentralization worked in the first 5 years. The first 5 years, 2013 to 2016, the first 5 years, that decentralization really worked. And then what we are getting is, the counties were busy setting up the structures, and perhaps whether there was more commitment or not, that could be the question. But then, in the second half, because of course we have the 5-year political period, after the second half, then apathy began to creep in, especially in the healthcare system, in some of the counties that we're going to. Citizens began to see deterioration of services, terms of delivery, mismanagement of healthcare services. Again, overall, just poor service delivery, whether they are, no drugs, basic commodities, health worker challenges. We witnessed quite a number of health worker strikes of doctors and nurses. And one of the questions that, of course, I was wondering when it comes to when I compare with the education, is whether, because previously doctors never really had a union, so what does that mean actually in terms of what we've seen in the healthcare sector? The fact that now, so the question that I ask is effective decentralization time-bound? Like, are we saying that, when we kick off, it's really good and it's working, but then after some time, it doesn't really, then it begins to deterioration of services? Again, is it possible that county leaders were running out to devolve and therefore really didn't have personal interest, but now once structures are in place, perhaps they also saw loopholes that they can exploit for their own gains? So perhaps in the initial phases, people are putting up structures, also perhaps not really quite picking the loopholes, but the second round, already structures are in place, so they can already see the gaps they can exploit. Again, let's move on. So again, but however, the story is not that that bad in the country. Some countries are doing very well. I would say very well, but at least well, and there's overall improvement of healthcare services. And then some of them, Makueni, Kakamega, Istiros is coming up, although also with some challenges. And also Siaya is also emerging as, having done some good. So overall, the indicators that are mentioned in the data are to do with improved infrastructure, whatever the citizens pick as quality of services, drugs and commodities, human resource issues, whether they have universal, access to universal health schemes, whether at the county level or at the national level. But what we see, even in counties, there are 2 counties in Kenya, for example, that have their own county health schemes. But these counties also, enrollment in the national scheme is low. But that also presents a challenge when it comes to seeking care within the Wold structure. Because then if you only have the county health care card, and you do not have the national health care card, that means if you, in a referral system, because referral is up to the level 6, it means that when you go to the national health facilities, then you'll have challenges in terms of accessing care. Because the card from the county is not admissible at that level. It will not be accepted at that level. That means then you have to pay out of pocket or find alternative ways of meeting your healthcare needs. Again, the other positive aspect that's emerging is that counties are established medical training institutions. Again, this capacity building is ongoing, and it's one of the indicators that is emerging as positive. Again, but some countries have failed to actually deliver. Either the infrastructure is still at the level they were during when the revolution started. Stockouts, drug stockouts are common. Human resources, health workers that are unhappy. So again, then we find the same counties. It's interesting because the question we're asking, how comes that after the first 5 years of revolution, this people didn't perform, but then you still have put them back? So again, we find this kind of situation where citizens, again, seems like they're captured in terms of really determining their part in terms of what they want in healthcare. Let's get it to the end. So again, in terms of countries' investment, there isn't much investment in lower level, level 1, level 2. We see that as a gap. And even in terms of investment, it's been in infrastructure. And some respondents argued that countries are investing where they know they can reap. So infrastructure is much easier to eat into, if I may use that not very good word. But again, this is a feeling that is a perception that we're getting, but that is actually necessarily the question. Is there another underlying problem beyond that? Because I think it's an issue of governance and the structure of governance. And where citizens perhaps are not very empowered, then we find that kind of a problem where there's a lot of blaming, but perhaps the problem is actually elsewhere. So one thing that we find, and this is a concern for counties, is a lot of vertical versus horizontal self-referral by patients. So either patients seeking care from another county, so if your county is not working, so you go to a county where facilities are provided, so you seek care from that. And this was common, especially either in the neighboring counties, so it means that you're actually utilizing the finances of that other county when your county fails to invest in healthcare. So again, so there was that, or patients bypassing levels of facilities. Of course, it's supposed to be a referral system, so they would bypass maybe level 1, level 2, and go to level 4 or level 5. So that means also then again you are burdening the system on the upper level, but again leaving the lower level systems without. But of course, it has to do with how well are they supported. But that also means that there's an overburdening or overloading of health workers, either at the higher level or at the alternative in the other counties. And again, of course, high cost of care. Even when I move from my village to another county, it means that I'm losing time. It means that I'm using money, either in transport, the opportunity cost is there. And of course, what we also found is also there's a compromise, the feeling of compromise in terms of the well-being of the citizens, because when they go to those counties, either they will not declare their county of origin, because in some cases they would say, if we say we are from this county, we'll be told to go back to our county to get our care from them. Of course, you're not supposed to deny patient services, but again, some would say we don't say where you're coming from. We just say we are from that particular county where you're going to seek care. So again, we found that. So of course, then the question of the elite and why would they support healthcare provision? Like I said, they are broad-based, either international, national, county, or community level, and they also include people holding political offices. The MCA in particular emerged quite key in terms of supporting revolution in healthcare service provision. But of course, and all of them, of course, they are varying roles. I will try to move a bit fast. But of course, what we find with the MCA is that it also depends on the loyalty. The loyalty, when you use the loyalty as a tool, how counties at the lower level, particularly the lower level benefit, depends on also the level of loyalty of their leaders. So these elites, of course, can exercise power in decision making depending on their political positioning and closeness to political elites. And in this case, in our context, we talk about the governor. And the elites can enhance self-service delivery and can create barriers at the same time in implementation of decision making. So again, what we found is that in some areas, like there's one county we went to, and they would say sub-county A is better than sub-county B because sub-county A MCA, B MCA is more loyal to the governor than the sub-county A MCA. So it's a way of punishing the MCA. I think this was mentioned yesterday. A way of punishing the MCA who is not loyal. But of course, that trickles down to the citizens. So, and these are the citizens now who begin to hope either to neighboring counties or to other facilities. So again, this is the kind of scenario that we are seeing. So what we know is that with devolution, when it comes to elites, elites are likely to capture, there's likely capture of sub-county units by local elites. We also see this, like in terms of the kind of infrastructure they are put up in the facility. Again, the issue of whether citizens are aware, if it's low, then again, there's possibility for elite capture. And then also the citizens' willingness to participate or not may be compromised by the elites themselves, depending on what their motives is. So eventually what we find is that citizens might just be mere recipients of services and not really participating in decision making. So again, so this again is supported by the Afrobarometer data of 2018. When you look at how citizens engage with their leaders, we found, of course it's overall in the country, not only for a particular county, is that, most citizens really engage with their leaders. Of course, this means the MCAs, again, these are the closest to them. Again, we find that this becomes a challenge in terms of even citizens' involvement in participation. So therefore then, what is it that you can say has made some countries to succeed and others not to succeed? In some countries, loyalty and chronism is a norm. So, and of course this is a negative issue because it has to do with governance. Again, there's a governance of through exclusion or silencing of non-loyal elites, because we consider the MC, for example, to be elites, but again, we find that there's this kind of silencing, and according to some respondents, governors prefer to work with their people only, and this makes other communities feel marginalized and left out of the government. So again, this aspect of loyalty is running out through, in most of the interviews that we did, that you only benefit because you're loyal. So, no, I think I already did this. Just move on. So again, we asked the question then, under what conditions would decentralization of health work? And has it to do with how health was devolved? For example, should we have devolved the way we did through the Big Bang? There's a feeling that some sectors devolved well, health sector did not go very well. It does not have the right structures. So again, there's need for rethinking in terms of should health sector have been devolved in the way the education sector was devolved, where they carefully decided what can go to the county level and what should remain at the national level. But again, then what is the role of national government in ensuring that both funds benefit all parts of the country? Of course, this I think will be touched by this team. So again, the question is mainly what variables do we consider when you're thinking about really the role of national government, either in terms of financing, and of course, whether they have any supervision role over the counties. So again, some counties feel that if they don't have some level of facilities, like they don't have level 5, they will not be able to get all the funding. So again, how is this funding, for example, determined? Again, the fact that health is not, you cannot really devolve health on its own, that it's dependent on other sectors, whether it's agriculture, whether it's education, again, whether it is roads, again, it's also emerging in the findings. And just to quote one of the key informants is that drought is a health issue due to conflicts, and people are injured during conflicts and become malnourished as a result of drought. So if you're really to deal with health, then you must really think beyond just the devolution itself. So finally, the question that we asked them, if it seems like devolution is not working, should we re-centralize? Should we take services back to the national government? Of course, we've had the problems of this workforce, the strikes with the health workers. They feel trapped, either because they have delayed salaries, issues of promotion training, the work environment, or the health work managers being non-medics. Of course, that's a concern for them. Issues of drugs and medical supplies. And also there has been call from the Council of Governors for revision of guidelines on procurement and distribution of drugs so that then it is not controlled at national level. So again, what do they say? But when we ask the citizen, they say no. Despite all the challenges as they face, they still do not want healthcare to be decentralized. So I think it depends on whose voice are you listening to. From the point of the citizens, they think that they still, despite the challenges they have, health services are closer to them. In some cases, they have these universal health schemes, which are enabling them to access care. And they're also tapping into the national program. Of course, there's a bit of confusion between what is national and what is county when you look at the data. Because some of the programs they're setting at the national government programs are real national programs, not necessarily the county programs. And again, something that even when there was the real before decentralization, healthcare still had problems. So they think that they will not cheat themselves by saying that we should go back to national government. We'll still be facing the same problems. If I need specialized care, how do I get to the national level? So again, they think that it's actually, and then it's more costly for them. Then of course, then we ask if they don't want services to go back, then what is the problem of devolution of health? So it's mainly boiling down to leadership problem. It's a governance issue, it's a leadership issue. And we've had voices that we see, because of course when you corrected the data, we have the new government now, and we've had a lot of voices saying, no, we begin to see, we are seeing services coming. medicine is there, drugs are there, doctors are now available. So again, it's a question of governance. And a number of them, of course, are saying they've had to pay off debts that were inherited by previous governments. So really, for us, what we're saying...
You have 2 minutes to round up, if you can.
So I think I will try and conclude with this statement that decentralization does not automatically lead to improvements, and success is dependent on the local context and the nature and quality of collaboration between local agencies. So again, I think this is what we see as really, we might just stop there, okay, because of time. So I think for us, this is really what we see as the issue of evolution of health. So I think I stop there.
Thank you so much for that comprehensive sectoral focus. A very important contribution. The floor is open for questions and comments. We have something like 15 to 20 minutes before coffee or tea. Any immediate reaction? Yes,
Yeah, because people are quiet, let me be the first one to go. One thing that we should not be taking for granted, political elites, and I'm using the concept of political elite who wants to win an election for the sake of it. It must be seen in the context of political enrichment and even economic enrichment. That's why there is no elite who retires from politics poor in the part of the world where we come from. So we must tie that then to service delivery and ask one simple question. Why then, if that's the motivation of getting into politics, of getting into service delivery, and seeking to do some work in the counties and deliver, why is it then that some counties do better in delivery of health services than others? That is, why would some elites, elected leaders, do better than others in providing better services, in provision of health care services than others, and yet they're in political position for the same reason? Advance your political career, make sure that you remain in power, and so on. That's the first question, and I think it's implied in one or the other. But it needs to come out, because I think your question is leading you to this conclusion that you are making, but I think that your data presented there gives us an opportunity to answer those seemingly important questions. The second question is, what incentives do they, as leaders, the people you have called MCAs, these are elected at in Anglophone Africa, and even in, I think in Egypt, they are called councillors. Am I right? I've read some work of John Scott, and I think they are called councillors. That's the lower level position in first past the post-electoral context. Now, what incentives do they have to behave the way they are doing to ensure that healthcare succeeds? But most important is also the technocrats. The people serving in the health sector, we need not lose sight of them. Yesterday I talked about bureaucratic elites. They are as important, bureaucratic elites are as important as political elites, because we need to start asking ourselves, why is it that the bureaucrats also want to, some of them succeed and others fail, and they are working in the same sector? Some doctors put their hand into it to say that we must succeed, and others don't care. Some organize labor unions to go on strike. Others say, no, we cannot go on strike because the patients will suffer. Others are saying, let's go on strike to improve standards of health services in our county. Others will not care about standards of health services in the county. Things will go on and they will not care, they will not protest, they will not provide anything in record. So that will give us an opportunity of explaining variations in service delivery, and give us an opportunity even to compare devolve the health services in any particular country, even health services run by local governments in Morocco and Tunisia. That's the question that we may be in a position to answer if we raise it in that manner. The last point is to say that the issue of whether devolution is time-bound or not in terms of succeeding is not really the most important question, but the most important question in this regard is why is implementation, why is there the state of things the way they are in Kenya? At one time we saw very good success, on the other hand we see very limited success, right? Supposing we start seeing very good success immediately now that there is a new administration, then your question will not be applicable, because there is a new, you said it's 5 years worked, the remaining 5 years have not worked. Now we have a new administration and things might work. So your first question is not valid. So, but then the question to ask is, why is there the state of things the way they are, so that it becomes something like a political, what we call problem-driven political economy analysis of the devolution sector in Kenya. And that gives us an opportunity to look at other sectors, either managed by local authorities in even in Zimbabwe, Tunisia, and Morocco, asking the same question and getting very different type of answers. So it will give us an opportunity to provide some policy solutions. Let me stop there. Thank you.
Yes.
Oh, I had another mic here.
Oh, yeah.
I had two.
Now we are following the one that is speaking. We are not very certain about what's on the table. But I think they are now working well. Thank you very much and for that very comprehensive sectoral presentation, which touches on an important element of devolution, particularly in the Kenyan context of that came in the presentation that perhaps we need to pay attention to. One is, even though a lot of money is being allocated to the county health sector or health department for that matter, you will find that a lot of it is going towards infrastructure development. And this could be in line with what Karuti was saying about the interests of the governing elites. They want to associate one with something that the citizen will see, that Governor X or the Councillor X brought this hospital to us. So there's that focus on infrastructure as opposed to the systems. And I have in mind here having medicine in the hospital, having doctors, because that may not be very feasible. The other point that you have raised is that it also offers opportunity for kickbacks, if I am to use that word, that when you are having construction, many times we found this in our study that you order for building stone, for sand, and they are diverted. So those in decision making end up benefiting, and that in itself is becoming a problem. For how long are we going to think and concentrate on infrastructure as opposed to the system for provision of health sector? Another interesting issue that support again your presentation is on the distribution of drugs, and we found this in many cases when we're doing the field work, that around any major hospitals you'll see mushrooming of chemists, and it is alluded again, maybe no evidence per se, that drugs come, they are distributed by the governors to individual hospitals, but at the end of it, then how drugs come from the hospital through KEMSA, then they come to, they get their way to the chemist is because of the the collusion of now the bureaucratic elite. The drugs are in the hospital, but they are channeled to private chemists, where now as a citizen you go, you're told you need this drug, but you can only find it in chemist X. And you later on get to know that this chemist is associated either with the person working in the hospital or the politician, something that again brings about the conflict of interest or personal interest as opposed to public interest. So having said that, again, it's in the level 6 where we talked about the financing that is directly through the national government. This again is something that we need to look at in line with the fiscal decentralization of what we call conditional grant, because I think even in level 5, level 4, monies are channeled directly to the hospital. Does that perhaps offer a solution to what we're saying, that there's a focus on the level 6 more than the level 5, and sorry to really focus more on the Kenyan case, because that's the center of today's presentation. But perhaps, is there a better financing model that could help us address this problem, where people are also bypassing? Because I'll not go to a local dispensary when I know I'll not get drugs. I'll still end up buying from chemists, and so if I can go to level 3 and get medicine, then that's better for me, in spite of the time used in travel. So those are some of the issues perhaps we need to bring up in the presentation, so that which may touch on the political elite and role in health sector. Thank you very much. Oh, this one.
Thank you, Juan. Just a technical question. If I understood correctly, you can correct me. Priority is given to basic health. At the same time, we know that decentralization of specialized health suppose decentralization of university hospitals and the decentralization of the teaching of medicine. I don't care about higher education. It's very expensive, as you know. So can you tell us how was it managed under this experience of decentralization?
Do you want to respond?
Maybe I have just one question. Very quick.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
So thank you, Professor Tan, for the presentation. Firstly, my question is: you mentioned that the first 5 years of decentralization of health services was successful. So from 2013 to 2018. My question is: does your research worked on some key indicator of success of the first 5 years? What was the reason of success? Was it a problem of leadership, as you mentioned, like a governing knowledge or governing expertise transition that was failed? Was it a problem of financing? In the first 5 years, it was a national financing, a high financing level, and then after the 5 years, it decreased. Was it an elite disengagement, like we saw in Morocco case? Like they are interested only to have financial revenue when they are governing, and they are disengaged with service delivery. So what I want to know is if there is any research about the 5 first years, and what is the difference between the next phase that makes the decrease of health services. Thank you.
Thank you. I think let me start with one of the questions. terms of research on the first 5 years. I think we have quite a lot of data on this. And in terms of what the health outcomes are and the trends, I may not have the real answer in terms of why the first 5 years work, but of course, devolution also was supported in terms of how counties devolved, either by through the national systems or by external actors. So I think that, and also it was a process of learning. So and I think when one is learning, they are perhaps more keen in terms of also implementing in the process. So I think perhaps that's why we are seeing better outcomes, because the perspective we are getting is, it seems, the first 5 years we considered in putting up the structures. So it is possible that now, after you put up the structure, like I mentioned, then we begin to see progress. And of course, it was also not very clear. There was also a lot of confusion, to be honest, in terms of how devolution was working. So what we have now, like what we've had in countries that are working, healthcare, you get a feeling of decentralization to the lowest level. But we also have a scenario where there's a feeling of decentralization within decentralization, where you find sub-county units feel that they're neglected, and all support is coming to the county level as opposed to the lower units. So again, we also have a scenario where in the context of decentralization is emerging, and not just in the health sector, but also in revenue collection. So that money even from the markets, for example, is collected and taken to the county level instead of being retained at the lower level. Within the earlier system, money that were collected at the dispensary level would remain at that level, but now that is not the case. So perhaps, I don't know whether that is, or maybe that is not. I'm not. So again, yeah, in terms of training of health workers, of course, the county level facilities are training the nurses, more of those who will be retained within the county. But of course, we have the national facilities training the doctors. So again, the training, whether at the national level or at the county level, is very depending on the different kind of health workers. So, but yes, counties also training health workers, mainly nurses, the clinical care personnel at the county level, but still doctors are trained at the national level facilities. The other one, of course, the question of infrastructure. It's true. There's a tendency to follow interests, and this is what we are seeing. Maybe the reason why infrastructure is either expanding or being neglected is because that's where perhaps money is easy, and also citizens will see. They say this facility was built by our leader, and while they're saying there are no services, they're also saying there's nothing they have done, there's nothing they're seen. So again, what can be seen visually makes a lot of impact, even in terms of gaining political mileage. So again, this could be it, but of course, quality of care, again, is important in as much as what we see is important. Yes, Professor Anika, I know you raised such a number of
on elites.
Those were general comments.
Yeah, they are general, so I'm not sure whether to respond. And I like the comment on whether it's done well. I'm really wondering, why should the first 5 years work? And are we likely to have another 5 years working, another 5 years not working? What is the solution to this? To me, is a question. And of course, the question of why does it work like this is important to do this.
Can I support? Yeah, let me support something, Dr. Mohammed. I think the Kenyan case, there are so many things that, for example, you know that 2015, we had the MDGs. You know, every country was also working so hard to achieve the MDGs, and I think there were also MDGs that were really touching on health. And Kenya also did very well, especially in issues of maternal health. And when we come, and you know, like devolution comes towards the end of the attainment of the first phase of MDGs. So you might find that the 2013-2018 regime, actually you might find that there are some of the outcomes, like maternal health, was still part of what the government had invested very heavily when it came to attainment of the MDGs. Then also, I think also based on what the professor was saying, every elite in Kenya comes with their manifestos. So we might have a regime that maybe have paid so much attention to health. And I'll give you an example. Kenya, and I hope we know that the attainment of the Vision 20, that's what we are calling the Vision 2030 in Kenya, is being modeled through what we call the medium-term plans, you know. And we just went through the medium-term 3, which actually had the outgoing president who had just left office. He had come up with what he used to call the Big Four agenda. And in part of the Big Four agenda, he really paid a lot of attention in ensuring that the country embraced what you call the universal healthcare coverage. So that could have actually contributed to what Anne was talking about, a big success when it comes to implementation of decentralization of health. Also, like most of areas that actually have done very well when it came to decentralization had already existing infrastructure. So I'll give you a very good example of some counties whereby they are found in the rural area, in the rural areas, and some counties which are also found in the urban areas. So the counties that were in the urban areas already had existing health infrastructure, you know. So with more government funding, you can be sure they would do better, you know. They would do better as compared to those that are in rural areas, which have now to come and set up new infrastructure, and maybe the local elites there don't even pay so much attention to health. Maybe they have other new agendas in their political manifestos. So those kind of variations have actually brought in a lot of variations in how counties have actually performed when it came to health. So, and that's what the professor was really focusing on, is what are some of the incentives of the local elites as far as service delivery is concerned. And I think this is something that is a very ongoing debate, because you find that some people will pay more attention to education, some people will pay more attention to health, some people will pay more attention to all kinds of public goods. And I think that has actually brought a lot of variations. Also, a lot of money went to the counties between 2013, the first fiscal year where the government heavily invested in health was 2013-2014. So a lot of money went again to these counties. So in a bit also to account for this money, they also had to spend a lot of money in ensuring that, for example, they're coming up with infrastructure. But now what has come, the reality has hit that yes, we build a hospital, like one of the counties have built, Kakamega County, built a very big infrastructure, but now it's not operational because they cannot sustain it in terms of inputs like medicine, inputs like doctors, what we call the human resource for health. So all these kind of dynamics have actually contributed to variations in terms of health. Now we are actually now worried because now the new president who comes in, Kenya has already started working on towards universal healthcare coverage, piloted and now already being implemented. So will he pay attention towards that? So you might find that if he does not pay so much attention towards health as universal healthcare coverage as enshrined in SDGs, then you might find that now the outcomes of the gains that we had actually gained over this since 2013 might actually now start being lost. So all these kinds of dynamics have actually been contributing towards this. So I support that.
I think all of us may lose sight of the theoretical meaning of all these issues that you are bringing up here. Because the question that we need to tie together and get an answer to is A, what type of state and regime is supportive of devolution or decentralization, and which type of state and regime and accompanying regime are opposed or claim blockages to devolution and the reason for that, and decentralization in general. The second and related question is that we should disabuse the fact that, the observation that decentralization is a technical process or it's a technical reform. It is not. By its own nature, decentralization is political. It's political because it's about sharing resources. It's about what will the local authorities take, and also about what the local authorities will do with their finances. And the moment we see it not as a technical reform program, but as a political program, then we start answering the question, why is it that some succeeded and others did not succeed? There is no central government that there is no central government with an interest of political power that would give 100% devolution without struggle. Even in the US today, as I said yesterday, there's still the struggle of how much they should retain at the center. Even in Nigeria, you must do something with the governors in order to control them. And even in Morocco or Tunisia, the local governments can never be given autonomy you want to give them, right? No one, even in Zimbabwe, you can't give them. So it's for that, the balance between the center and the local, and how that balance is maintained politically is what we seem to be looking at as if it's a technical process. It's not, right? The reason why the reason why there were successes in some and failure in others is simply because of sometimes the relationship between the local and the center. We have seen incredible cases of leadership in Indonesia. There's a very interesting paper on Indonesia on the same things that we are talking about, where some parts of the country did exceptionally very well in terms of devolving healthcare, and others did very poorly. And when you look at it there is the notion of developmental leadership. Some heads of those particular units wanted to advance their political career, move away from the local level and start contesting senior positions. So you must provide yourself with a base of political support. So you are not providing healthcare services as an end in itself. There is the political base that you are cultivating by creating opportunities for better service delivery. So service delivery on its own is not, no, I mean, they have money to start hospitals. If we think that's charity they're doing, they're not. You are providing success for healthcare because you want to build a strong support base, political base. Without that notion of a strong political base, we cannot really talk about effective service delivery. You want to be cited having improved on SDGs. You want to be cited having good healthcare services in your place. And then on the basis of that, start leveraging on that for upper level positions. That's a premise, that's an hypothesis.
Thank you so much. On that note, let's thank Anne
Sorry.
for...
Sorry. Not even a question. I just wanted to highlight. We have a link. We are channeling live, streaming live, so you can share the link with others. I've shared the link with you.
Okay. Thank you so much. And let us give a pam-pam, and then we prepare. Thank you. I think it's now time for tea. We're running a bit behind, 10 or 15 minutes behind. So I stand to be guided, but perhaps we should be here by quarter to. At most, yeah.
Yeah.
Quarter to 12.
Let's do quarter to the hour.
Okay.
15 minutes.
15 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you.